Hello, everybody. Welcome to Skeptic Skeleton streams. We have MathPig joining us here today. Say hello.
Hi.
And we have Jeff joining us as well. Greet the
Hello.
people.
Hello.
And today we're here to discuss, learn, ask some questions regarding the historicity of Jesus. This came about basically because I wanted to do a video on the subject, and essentially I found that there's so much information and the topic is so big that I thought it would be more productive to have a group discussion about it than for me to try to explain everything about it by myself. So that's why we're here.
Yes, and I'm doing the producing, so I'm going to try and stop that secondary stream that supposedly is happening. So, hi everybody.
Are you trying to
Also,
track?
if there are any technical complaints, I refer all technical complaints to MathPig.
Yeah, it's all my fault. I don't know why there's two. Shouldn't be two. Okay, the other one I'm going to delete forever, and there we go.
Hopefully that. Okay, good.
No,
Hopefully, I was
Okay,
gonna
we're good
say
to
that
go.
doesn't end our evening prematurely.
no,
like-
no, 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 no. Our evening should still be proceeding as according to. But I'm just going to double check now and go to this.
And I'm going to turn off my camera for just a second. I'll be right back.
We should
Okay.
just have this one. Now, shout out to Keith Newton for letting me know about that. Keith should be checking now that this is the only one live. And all's good. Okay, so we're ready to stream then. We're ready to actually do a show.
Hey, we can let the games begin.
Yeah, so I brought notes. Excuse how dirty my notes were. I made them at work today, so please do excuse my notes. But I brought notes. I think I'm the only one that did research.
I attempted
I did
to do
research a while ago.
Yeah,
Does doing research a very long time ago
I
count?
wouldn't say it was research. It was more refreshing what was going on than it was research. Because I don't know. I know a wee bit about this. You would do too, Jeff. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I've gotten into this a little bit. I've never been like I said, I've been challenged a couple of times by some theists that wanted to prove me wrong or something because they assumed I was a mythicist.
Yeah.
But I don't think I ever really have been. I have I've been sympathetic to some arguments from mythicists, but I never leaned that way. At least I never committed to it fully. Maybe a few years ago I might have been more inclined to, but yeah, a few had approached me with a few things and some questions. I looked into it a little bit, but that's about it.
Well, if I could ask Skeptic, you have questions, right? What's the first question that you have? Considering that me and Jeff have done a wee bit, and we could maybe enlighten you or fucking try and rest anyway.
So, one of my first questions, I guess, just is in terms of non-biblical sources for historical Jesus. And that is not to say that the biblical sources are automatically disregarded, but that is to say that they are the most common when I'm investigating the subject. So, what are some, if you guys are aware of, are there
Well,
any non-biblical
there's
references
the
to
two big
Jesus?
ones. There's Josephus. I think Josephus was what, 92, Jeff?
Yeah.
Yeah, Josephus in 92. But then he has the one statement that he mentions Jesus and the brother James, I do believe. And then there's the Testimonium Flavium, which has been tweaked, and they don't really believe that now. They think it's been not a forgery, but changed. So there is the Testimonium Flavium is all Jesus is the Messiah. He's fucking brilliant. He's wonderful. But they do believe that was tweaked later on by Christians. And that's, the original part was, yes, there's a Jesus. Yes, his followers believe that he was resurrected. Yes, he has a brother called James. And yes, he was stoned. And I think that's all that they can confirm from Josephus. Jeff?
Did you say stoned? As in high or?
Oh, no. With the bricks, man.
But Jesus was crucified, right?
No. Brother James. I think his brother James was stoned. Dr. Josh, perfect. We only started like 2 minutes ago, Josh.
Oh, awesome.
Hello, it's nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
It is. It's
I'm the one called Skeptic Skeleton.
Excellent. See, Jeff.
Jeff
How are
is
you,
here.
sir?
Still trying to justify my worldview, man.
Yeah, well, do
Grinding
you have
that out.
grounding of instantiation of the necessary preconditions of all intelligibility for the possible and possible possibilities?
Oh, you really know how to make an entrance, don't you? Like. And I just popped Dr.
I do appreciate it, Dr. Josh, when you troll my brother with that. I appreciate when you do that to me, but I don't know why, but I really enjoy it when you target my brother with that stuff.
It has a good effect, I think,
It does, yeah.
or an effect. Good for me.
Josh,
I enjoy it.
We were just working around the room, and Skeptic asked non-biblical sources for the historicity of Jesus, and we were just discussing Josephus and the testimony in Flavium and how it's been possibly tweaked by Christians.
Hmm.
And Tacitus.
And obviously there's Tacitus as well.
I do. There's one thing that kind of comes out, at least it did early on when I was starting to look at it, was there was I noticed that was some, and it probably happened with me too. There's a tendency for like skeptics to think that, okay, well, I don't believe the Bible, so I'm not going to really count that as being any kind of, I'm not going to give it really any historical weight. And it wasn't until I started reading scholars like Bart Ehrman and people like that it's like, no, that's not really right. Like they were deriving these stories from somewhere. They had sources of some kind.
Yeah.
They weren't working within, the parameters of what we would call modern historical scholarship or anything, but there's still something to that. There's still some weight. So the fact that he's an attested historical individual, the stories in the Bible do, they do count. The real problem, the rub, is where you try to say what that's what Jesus is saying in all four Gospels is actually what Jesus said, and not someone's take on what he might have been preaching at the time.
One of the things that really lands it down for me is the whole idea of where he was born. All right, like it's Jesus of Nazareth. Okay. He had to be born in Bethlehem. He's the line of David. All that sort of bullshit from where he's coming. Joseph is the line of David, possibly Mary as well, the genealogies and all that. He had to be born in Bethlehem. But he's from Nazareth. I think recently they have archaeologically discovered Nazareth, but New York doesn't prove Spider-Man, so Nazareth doesn't prove Jesus. But why have him born in Bethlehem? Why come up with this whole thing? If it was a fictional character, we'll have him born in Bethlehem. We'll have him grow up in Bethlehem. We can just have him, hang around in Bethlehem till he's fucking 18, going to the clubs there. Why does they have to come up with this elaborate thing to go to Bethlehem, to come back again? And it's to guarantee for the story that he is coming from the line of David.
Yeah, Pine Creek actually just covered that today. I didn't watch all of his stream, but
I didn't even know that.
he was showing Tovia Singer was going over that, because Tovia Singer's done a few videos on, I think, Christmas and stuff. I don't know, maybe he does that around this time of year just to poke some Christians, but he was ripping into Matthew, the author of Matthew is just basically a scumbag, because he basically takes this part from Micah chapter 2 from the Old Testament and then removes a piece and then kind of contrives this to say Jesus is from Bethlehem kind of thing. And it has nothing, he was going on and giving the example, didn't have anything to do with that. His connection to Bethlehem was the fact that David was from Bethlehem originally, and he's the line of, but then Matthew comes along and uses that as some way to justify David was born there or something like that. It just seemed kind of it's really kind of doubling down and making sure the symbolism tracks, it's kind of hitting you in the face.
It all has to line up with what was said in the Old. Exactly. So.
Yeah, but if the singer's his opinion seemed to be if this guy was going from mimesis, he was kind of getting it wrong. He was overreaching. Mm-hmm. So okay, but I don't think that'll be very effective on most Christians, because he's a rabbi. Mm-hmm. Right.
So I'm curious, I guess, in terms of how do we, or I guess since you brought the topic up, Jeff, how do you distinguish in the Bible which parts have more weight than others? Because not all of it has unanimous weight. So how do you distinguish which parts are more in line with history versus which parts aren't?
I don't know. I don't. Yeah, somebody asked me that, but not in anywhere near as polite a fashion just yesterday on a Clubhouse thing. The gist of why they were asking it was because they were convinced I couldn't read the Bible and understand a word of it. I don't know. I think if for me, like I wouldn't count on myself to evaluate something like that as a layperson. Like if I was just to pick up the Bible and start reading in Genesis and finish in Revelation, I don't know that I would be able to say like, this one I think's got more historical punch to it than the other one, and maybe this one's less fanciful or something like that. But when I started restudying the Bible, reading different textbooks like John J. Collins' Intro to the Old Testament, and Bart Ehrman has a good textbook on the New Testament, it gives you a different appreciation for what to look for. And the biggest thing is that every one of these books has a slant to it. They all have an agenda, and that's not a glitch. That's a feature. That was kind of the reason why a lot of those genres were written that way. So I think they're all historically valid, but they're historically valid in context. And so much of what we get about biblical stories and the books of the Bible are that they're just chapters in one super narrative, and that's probably the worst way to represent it. I hope that answers the question a little bit.
Yeah, it does. And I guess that's sort of, I didn't want to necessarily transition to the next question, but that's the approach that I have, because I have heard of Flavius Josephus and Tacitus and those different citations. My query, or my question, I guess I should say, is I'm not sure how I know that they knew what they wrote. So I know that Flavius Josephus and Tacitus are, at least when they're presented to me, they're well attested. But
The
when we talk
information that
about what,
the information that they're putting across isn't really what, if you take the testimony and Flavium out of it, it's what they are saying that the believers believe. They're not, so it's not like, I know you understand. It's like, how do they know what they're saying? They know. So it's like we went and talked to a group of people at the fucking concert, AC/DC fans. So I know what AC/DC fans believe about AC/DC, even though I wasn't at the concert, and it's not really my opinion. I'm getting it secondhand. So I've asked 50 of the 100 AC/DC fans that was there what their opinion was. So I rate that down. I think that's the sort of way you need to look at it.
Okay, that makes much more sense, because when I investigated the topic, people who are in favor, or at least, how do I express this? A lot of the Christians that I've come across who are in favor of historical Jesus will use it not in the way you described. They will use it to say they reference Jesus, therefore Jesus existed, not they reference what the Christians thought about Jesus.
Well, it's 92
So,
AD, so it's at least minimum 60 years after the historical Jesus, the person was dead. So it's got which is at least, I would say, second generation. You're not going to have 40 and 50-year-old people of this time period screaming and shouting in protests. They're at home barely alive trying to find some fresh water. You're going to have the second generation here. So it's at least the second generation. They've been grown up upon this. They've been told this, by their parents who are around, so they've experienced a first-hand story. They're now passing it on as at least a second or a third-hand story. And that's only if they're biological growing up from it. They could be friends of friends or whatever it could be. But it's possibly third or fourth generational story-wise, if you understand what I mean.
Okay. Yes, I do. I'm just saying, when I was initially, and this is why I wanted to talk to other people about it, because similar to what Jeff was saying with the Bible, I don't necessarily feel qualified enough to go through all of the scholarly texts regarding the subject and form an opinion.
We brought the expert.
Yeah.
He's just very quiet writing down notes.
And I'm eager to hear what he has to say. But yeah, so I that makes sense to me. I was just saying that I had not heard that expressed in that way before, but that does make a lot of sense to me. So thank you.
Well, that's how I look upon it.
Yeah, I don't think that. I mean, the New Testament, I think, actually gives me more trouble than the Old, because if you get into, and it's sort of weird, if you start studying it, if instead of coming at it from like the direction, like if you wanted to go to a church and try to get introduced to like how the Bible works or something like that, it's going to be theology forward. But if you wanted to get into it from sort of a scholarly side, probably want to pick up some textbooks and look at it from that side of things. And what I find is that I'm a little bit like I'm going to slaughter her name, but is it Stavrakopoulos or something? I think that
Francesca Stavrakopoulou.
Stavrakopoulos, yeah.
See,
And so
there you go.
she has this great respect for the Old Testament, and then you bring up the New Testament, and she's like, yeah, maybe not. she's a little cold towards the New Testament. She doesn't think, and I find myself, the more I study it, I think the Old Testament, I think it's easier for me to kind of forgive some of the whatever they want to call them, doublets or triplets, the kinds of inconsistencies or whatever. Because there's a with the Hebrew Bible tradition, the Old Testament, there's sort of this preservation of culture and sort of a not so much a nation state, but there's sort of a mnemonic device that's trying to be preserved here with us. And with the New Testament, the more you study that, it's still fascinating, but it comes across as this sort of desperate attempt to it's just sort of abusing, I think, and I don't think it's unfair to say abusing. In some cases, it's abusing aspects of the Old Testament in order to kind of shoehorn in, to convince people that Jesus is actually the Messiah and this covenant is fulfilled, and that old stuff, all the kind of Paul's baggage, the Apostle
same sort
Paul's
of way
baggage.
that the modern age is. You take a context of a conversation, you're like, look how much of an asshole this person is, but you don't see the whole thing. They're doing that with the Old Testament. They're taking one verse and going, right, we have said this, this, and this. This is a prophecy. This person must be Jesus. But if you go and read the entire chapter, or even maybe 2 or 3 verses either side, it's like, this is about X. This is in reference to this. But they just fucking go, copy paste.
Yeah. And I think that's the weirder thing, because if you approach it from the scholarly side of things, they're going to just look at the Hebrew Bible as the Hebrew Bible. But if you ended up approaching like a Christian church and you wanted to learn about that, almost everything that they're going to give you about the Old Testament is going to be about, and this points to Jesus here, and this was it was prophesying Jesus arriving here, and then doing this other stuff, and it's like, okay.
Look at it from their point of view, right? We are now sitting with a Bible in front of us. There's one there, multiple choices, probably more in fucking Josh's house. We've got the Old Testament, the New Testament, we've got the Jewish version, what do you call it, that begins with a T, the Torah, all these. We can get access to them and put them all right down in front of us because we have the printing press. What they did when they were bringing out the New Testament is not a lot of people read. Not a lot of people had access to this, that, and the other. Look at it from the point of view is, I can take this screenshot and that fucker doesn't have the internet. He can't go and double check me. He can't go and read the other context, the 3 verses before and the 3 verses after, because that Bible's not, that's the Torah at that time. That's not the Old Testament. That's the Torah. They're not going to go and read that. They're just going to take that snippet and take that. So that gives validity to it. That gives more strength, and more people will then believe it because they can't go and double check. They don't have access to this, that, and the other. So it's easier then. Looking at it now, we have the ability to look at it and go, that's fucking stupid. So I don't understand why people don't get it. But giving it strength back in the day, helping the legend, helping the faith go forward, we can write whatever the fuck we want down because these people can't check it. It's pre-internet. You can say whatever you want and people can't Google you. It helps strengthen it as it goes forward, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I think there's probably another layer to it on top of that, and that is that there's much more. Today we have very skeptical minds, right? This post-Enlightenment, leading up, particularly through the first millennium BCE. And again, my area of specialization is certainly not.
This is not my field of expertise. I'm going to kick you. Just move on.
It's not my area of specialization.
Just say it's not your zone of control. Just change the words a little bit.
But there's no question that there's interpretive depth with people have interpretive depth. So the example that I always like to give is there's a story from ancient Mesopotamia, the Assyrians, the Akkadians. It was called the Enuma Elish, and it's this creation story. And it's about the god Marduk. And Marduk, his name is made up of 2 signs, the sign for Kaf in Sumerian and the sign for the sun, Amar Utu. And what they did at the end of this text, because it's all about Marduk, they created 50 different names by playing with the parts of his name. So like if you were to play with like my name and come up with names, Josh is, the one who has the great footwear because he's Joshua, right?
Hats.
Or
Josh has the best hat. Or is it Megan? You just wore them better.
right. or Josh is the one of the affirmative because Ja could be pronounced Ya. So it's like German, ja. So there's wordplay and there's play with the different syllables and play with the different forms of the signs, but all of them carried a different meaning, right? And so, but they talk about this depth, this depth of interpretation, and you see this in early rabbinic texts. There are like 5 different ways you can interpret any given text, and so it's not that one is right and the other ones are wrong, or it's that they all have validity. And so the idea, and the thing is, we see this today, right? Even scholars that would reputable Old Testament scholars that are evangelical scholars will tell you immediately, of course, Isaiah 7:14 has an immediate referent, right? It's the prophet is speaking about a woman and her child, right there. But what they would say is that there's a distant referent, that it has near interpretation and far interpretation. There's depth to it. And so while we look at this, just as like Robbie was saying, like we look at this and we say, what? I mean, it's about that guy. See? They would say, yes, but there's another, interpretation that is also valid. And it's predicated on divine intervention in that text, giving it that depth. And that's what allows this stuff to.
Yeah, the belief in the supernatural and the ability of faith, that can be seen and all that sort of. Yeah.
Also, there is an aspect. So when I initially started looking into the subject, I did start more in a church setting, but that was a very long time ago, and that was because I just didn't know where to start. So I figured the best place to start would be with the people who have the Bible. And Revelation was a very big part of that, which is similar to what MathPig was saying. A lot of people would explain things and not explain them in a way that I could understand, but they would explain it part way, and then I had to receive the revelation to get the rest of it.
Yeah.
So similar to what Josh was saying, to get that distant, I'm sorry if I'm misspeaking for you, distant referent. Yeah, in order to get that distant referent, they would say, well, you have to pray to God, and then God will give you the connection between the two things. And honestly, I'm just trying.
You're not a believer. You're not seeing in between the lines,
Yeah, I mean, I was told that today very clearly on Twitter. Somebody tagged me and said, what do you think about this? And I always sort of cringe when I see that stuff because I'm like, oh my God, all right, fine. So I scroll up and it says there are over 300 fulfilled prophecies about Jesus in the Old Testament. And it was like, what do you do with that? Right. So I said, well,
the Amazon link to your book or else the video to the tar video. That's what you do with that.
I mean, I said, well, these are later theological interpretations, just like, Jeff was saying, there's a later theological interpretations on these, passages in the Hebrew Bible that have completely different meanings. I said, but I doubt that anything that I say here is going to have any effect. And her immediate, this was a Christian woman, her response to me was, you're an apostate. You don't have the Spirit of God. Goodbye. Right. I mean, that was it.
Oh, that was it. Yes. That's less hassle.
Yeah. Yeah. I was like, okay.
You don't say goodbye on Twitter. That's not the point of Twitter.
Twitter's not made for goodbyes. That's
Yeah.
interesting because that was actually going to be another thing that I've heard is a lot of people will try to affirm the historical existence of Jesus through prophecies and say he fulfilled all of these prophecies that were laid out in the Old Testament. I guess my question was always this might not seem very nuanced, but it just seems kind of obvious to me. The structure of the way these books are chronologically written is that someone could just write a book saying that this other part was fulfilled. It's like a Harry Potter story. You can pay off something that was set up earlier, but does that mean that it actually happened because someone wrote it that way or they slanted it that way
Well,
in terms
Yeah,
of fulfilling prophecies?
I don't think that gets enough attention. What ends up happening is that usually there's a skeptic that brings up this point, right? And then there's usually a theist that just starts losing it, right? Because what they think you're accusing them of, like you're accusing biblical authors of being charlatans. It's like not exactly. Although when I was a younger
scribal
atheist, a little bit.
errors is so easy to do. Everybody does it, and then they just go back and check it because they can hit a button on their fucking computer. But scribal errors is done by everybody. It's such an
Well,
easy
Mhm.
thing.
it's not just that though. It's if imagine that you're writing around that time, right? And you're exposed to people that are telling you stories about this Jesus character,
Well,
right? But and
that's
you
something right. We're talking about writing about it, right? What's the oldest scripture? The oldest. Sorry, I'm being very polite. What's the oldest writings we have that talks about Jesus? That would be the letters of Paul. Does Paul describe Jesus on the planet? Does he describe him metaphysical? There's no actual physical, I think, reference in Paul.
no, yeah,
So that we have to go to the Gospels,
yeah. And then the first one's probably Mark. I mean,
and we would agree that the first one's Mark. So that's what 60,
That's
70?
interesting.
70, I
70.
think is
See,
like
that's where I
yeah,
went. I
that's
went looking.
around.
The route I went looking was looking to see what's the oldest, most closest thing that we have for it. So then we've got
Well,
Mark, which would be 70.
yeah, but anyway, what I think one of the things that happens though, if let's say that you're Mark, right, and you're talking to people that are exposed to these stories, I don't think it's controversial to assume or to kind of conclude what a lot of New Testament scholars do, that whoever wrote the Gospels, was acquainted with people that had heard these stories or had been involved
Yeah,
in
but that's
some
what I'm saying.
groups or
They're not
whatever, right?
charlatans. It's Chinese whispers. They're getting it 40 years later, and it has to work its way
That
down.
yeah, that and I think as this stuff starts to, because it's weird if you see the development of the way the Gospels are written, Mark seems a lot more pragmatic than John.
Hmm. Oh,
But by the time you get to John, it starts getting, there's a lot more woo going on, if you'll pardon the expression, than what I think you get out of Mark or Matthew. And because
Mm.
there's a lot more theology, I think, that's been built up.
yeah.
And with John, I think at that point there's always a certain amount of enthusiasm that's going to get carried up into this, that people, and it depends on what kind of, how they're interpreting that, the kind of inspiration that they're getting out of this, the enthusiasm. They're making connections with these disparate pieces of Old Testament stuff. And wait, I heard this story that Jesus did A, B, and C. You know what? That reminds me of something that I read, here in the Old Testament. So I'm going to chalk that up as
Mhm.
as completed prophecy, fulfilled prophecy or something like that. So yeah, it's easy to kind of blame them for that.
But we do this all the time, right? And I think this is the point. I know I always bring these things back to like modern analogies, but I
Best way
just
to do
think
it.
I think they're clear. I mean, think about if you're in a relationship with somebody and you sense that maybe something's wrong, right? And so you start thinking back through the week, and you start thinking about, well, they said this when I asked if they could get me a cup of coffee. That was probably like a hint that they were upset about this. And
Right.
then later on, when I went to open the door for them, they gave me this weird look. And you know what? That was probably intentional. And you build this narrative,
Mhm.
right? Looking back through things that have happened. And then it turns out it's like a surprise party that they're throwing you, right? So there's been a weird air, something
Mhm.
weird in the air, but it's because they're trying to like hide us
Yeah,
Yeah.
out.
she give you a
So all
weird
these
look.
little
Yeah.
things,
Yeah.
you've built up this whole narrative citing all these things, and you've convinced yourself of it, that that all these things were pointing toward the way they're behaving right now. And it turns out all of that was total bullshit, right?
Mhm.
It's actually that you just sensed something, and there's a
Yeah.
completely different reason that you sensed it. but that's not you being a phony. If you like started telling, your friend about it, man, she's so mad at me and look at all this. And it's not that you're lying. It's this, you're convinced of it. It's just, you've
Yeah.
looked back through things and found bits and pieces that you think refer to it.
I think that, yeah, that was kind of the point that I wanted to make. So I think with like the way the Gospels are written, no, that was good. I think the way that they're kind of doing that, I think at that time there probably wasn't anything to really catch somebody from doing that. Like making those kinds of connections wasn't something that someone would discourage and say, no, that's irrational. No, they're doing that. Like they're becoming excited about it, and whether they're excited about it or it's foreboding or whatever, or however they're piecing it together, they're piecing this together, and the human mind's built to do that kind of stuff. So if they're following that through, and then they're creating this narrative, and they create this gospel, it's not necessarily, it wasn't nefarious. It wasn't, they weren't trying to produce an act of necessarily some kind of malicious propaganda or something like that. Although maybe somebody could make the argument maybe they were, but just being charitable and assuming that they weren't, the result would be the same. You'd get this thing that was loaded with this kind of heavily interpretive narratives. That maybe they weren't meant to be taken super literally. Like this is these were sort of the highlights and symbolic things that Jesus probably did. Kind of stuff. So yeah, the idea that we got to blame these people for doing this and for pulling the wool over people's eyes, like, no, I don't think that's it. I think they were probably a product of a culture that was getting kind of whipped up into this stuff, and they were perpetuating it by writing about it, and it just kept snowballing, and it kept kind of careening around throughout the culture, and it obviously changed because the stories that you hear about, even what you kind of see represented in the Gospels whenever they were written. Not to take too much of a tangent, but like the way the Pharisees are described in the four Gospels, they probably at the time that Jesus was actually living probably weren't all that influential. I mean, they were at the time, they were like the largest sect, but all Pharisees were Jews, but not all Jews were Pharisees. And the Pharisees were like the legalistic ones, but they weren't necessarily the influential ones. That would be the Sadducees. But the way when you read at least two of the Gospels, the Pharisees come across as the bad guys. They're the legalistic ones. They're constantly butting heads with Jesus because they're trying to tell him like what he can and can't do. And Jesus is like, no, that's not how things work anymore. That's probably a narrative device that was a product of the time that the books were written. So stuff like that, people kind of lose sight of.
Just looking in the chat here, there's something that Jessica's pointed out. The gospel writers were also writing stories that were trying to explain a character, not a biography, which is definitely, it's a nice wee synopsis.
Yeah. And I think this brings up maybe a broader point that we were talking about earlier. Like, how do you get down to, what's historically accurate and what's not, and the practice of historiography is, that's the whole thing. And one of the things that I think we have to realize, and obviously all three of you guys were talking about this earlier, is that you can't throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? You can't just say you can't go to either extreme, right? When I was a fundamentalist evangelical, it was I just like, it was just hold up your Bible, right? There's what happened. Like, you may tell you, I can tell you, here it is, right? There was a stream recently where like somebody said that, like, you want to know what happened? I'll just tell you. I'll read it to you. I'm sure there wasn't just one stream where somebody said that, and I get it because I used to do that, right? But then you can't then turn around and say, well, if there's mythological stuff in here, or if there's exaggerated accounts, or if there's just bad historical information in here, that all of it is worthless, that none of it is historically accurate, because that's not true either, right? Any more than if two people get in a car accident, here I go bringing it back to modern day, but two people get in a car accident, like, there's going to be historical realities in both of their accounts, but both of them are also going to have things that slanted in a very particular way, particularly if they're speaking to their insurance company.
But when you look back at the, as Jeff pointed out, the differences between, say, Mark and John, Mark, Matthew, Luke, there is definite, it's not that I looked at it through the right-hand window and I looked at it through the left-hand window. So this person seen a car coming, this person didn't. All they seen was the tree, so it's two different perspectives. It's this guy's seen a car, this guy's seen a fucking spaceship. It's completely contradictory at some points.
Also, I did want to, sorry to interrupt you, Dr. Josh, but I wanted to sort of add to that point of not throwing the baby out with the bathwater, because I technically would identify myself as a mythicist, but I wouldn't go as far as to say, I know there was no historical Jesus. When I say I'm a mythicist, I'm only expressing that I don't know if there was, or I have doubts, but I don't have enough information to say one way or the other. And I did briefly touch on this with like Bible stories, in the sense of like when I was looking for non-biblical sources, that's not because I think the biblical sources are automatically wrong, but that's because I don't know how to distinguish the truth from what's not true in the biblical story.
They're
So
clearly
because
biased.
because I'm aware that there are some parts of the Bible that talk about spaceships, I recognize that I need a mechanism to distinguish which parts are talking about perspectives, which parts are talking about interpretations, and which parts are talking about this is a factual thing that can happen or did happen, excuse me.
Well,
So
if I could give you
that's
some
just basically my approach, is trying not to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I'm trying to learn the whole story from as many sides.
well,
And I'm not trying to say that, the Bible is completely inaccurate in every regard.
if I
That's not
would
my intention, at
give
least.
some advice on that, Skeptic, is to basically just break it down. Look at it, what can be confirmed, what look at is more probable from your point of view, from a world, reality stance, not a Christian point of view, no supernatural, look down what you can slam down. Look down what you have confidence in. As I said earlier about the Bethlehem thing to Nazareth, that for me was something that would lean towards there had to have been a man. There had to have been somebody, I used to be of the opinion that it was a couple of Jesuses or Jesui or whatever the fuck the plural is. All these stories that came together to create one thing as time went on.
I just want to. It's GZI. All right.
Is it GGI? Right. Okay. Thank you.
I don't know.
Right. So I was of that before I did actual, more than fucking YouTube slander research. But what I can definitely say now is Jesus was probably a man. He probably lived in first century Palestine. More than likely was an apocalyptic preacher, the same sort of thing that was going around at the time. A lot of the people at that time did believe that the end of the world was coming. They had an apocalyptic thing coming, the end of the world is coming very soon, And I do believe that he died. He had a substantial enough following that whether Paul hallucinated or whether the other disciples had a group hallucination, it does happen. I know saying hallucination makes people think this thing, but grief and hallucinations and hearing voices, maybe not visually seeing them, but hearing voices is definitely something that happens a lot. And that caught wind, making reference to what I was saying earlier about not having to Google and not being able to double check the First Testament or the Old Testament when the new one comes out, having this and pushing it. And we've seen it happen as with Josh, as he says, with modern age. Look at Scientology. How quickly it became, I wouldn't say mainstream, but it grabbed big people. So you imagine back in the olden days, if you had the Tom Cruise of the olden days fucking doing it, 1,000 people. You don't just get Tom Cruise, you get Tom Cruise plus 1,000 people. It all gives it weight.
And that didn't start with a guy named Moses. It started with some guy named Ron. And it still got a following. I mean,
a good example of this in the modern era, William Prop, in his there's a 2015 publication on the Exodus, and it's called Exodus in a Transdisciplinary Approach or something. But he has an article in there, and he at the end of it talks about and I'm going to butcher it because modern history is definitely not my thing, but the Battle of Mons. And apparently the I guess it was the British that were making a retreat, and on the way back, like the Germans were chasing, and they somehow, while fighting going backwards, ostensibly, they they still like survived. They had this victory over the Germans. The Germans didn't press their advantage. And a story very quickly spread that these soldiers had seen these superhuman-sized beings holding huge bows and arrows, dressed in like medieval garb or something, shooting at the Germans, like covering their retreat, right? And this thing, it was hundreds of people were reported to, hundreds of soldiers were reported to have seen this, different eyewitness accounts. You know, it made the papers. It was international news very, very quickly. I mean, the story, you can read, again, go read Prop's article, and it's really, really interesting. Come to find, so like people on the battlefield believed that they had seen this, right? And it just spread like crazy. And this is in an age of like modern historical practices, right? And here it is. This is being reported everywhere. So I think we would all sit here and say that angels didn't deliver, the British against the Germans, right? But I think go back when people are actually primed for this sort of thing, and how much easier would something like that have been to spread. So I think that's an important comparison to make. He uses it with respect to the Exodus account, but I think it carries through in any of these types of things.
Yeah, I think that's interesting.
Yeah, I agree.
I think it's interesting that like what Jesus probably like set off, because like the way, in order for him to really kind of become as influential as he did, if it's true that he was an apocalyptic preacher with a following, and maybe he was actually declaring himself to be the future king of the Jews, and that Israel was going to get its independence back, under him. He was going to reestablish the 12 tribes of Israel with his apostles. Well, that'd make him something of a, like a little local warlord. And so Rome probably would have had a problem with that and would take steps, right? So they kill him.
One thing that's in my notes is you can guarantee everything that we've said before. He was a guy, first Palestine, this, that, and the other, and his following got to the point where it was big enough to annoy the Romans and go, look, this guy's getting a bit too big for his boots. Let's knock him down and crucify him.
And given at the time, they know from other writings around the time that the book of Daniel was very popular, at least narratives about Daniel. And so this apocalyptic message was sort of something that was circulating, and this guy kind of touched this nerve. So whether or not everything is as accurate, I think probably looking back at it, I think Rome was probably a little bit more concerned about him than the Gospels let on. I think his interactions with the Pharisees were probably a lot more pragmatic than they were, because in this case, naturally he's right because he's the Son of God. At least that's how Christians look back at it. But if you look at it the way those writers, Mark was probably writing after the destruction of the temple, after the war between Israel and Rome. So for them, and that was also the rise of the rabbinical tradition. The Pharisees were becoming the rabbinical tradition in Israel. So there was probably a little bit of a backlash about that. So there's a kind of a purpose narratively trying to set them up as kind of a not a fall guy, but kind of as a foil. But then Jesus ends up pivoting at least a couple of times. Like if historically this worked out and he got killed, the story managed to get transformed into not a failed political coup, but a sacrifice for the souls of all mankind. Possibly, depending on your theology. And so it's interesting, like to see that evolve. The story just kept going, and with probably not with every mutation, because there were different sects that died out because they had different takes and stuff on Jesus and his ministry. But the ones that ended up staying on, he probably went through 3 or 4 big changes, and all of them were influential enough that they kept the inertia going, that his legend just kept rolling forward until now he is what he is to Christians. But I don't think he was a guy. If he really was a man, I don't think if Christians could go back in time to see the historical Jesus, I don't think they'd recognize him.
I think Red Dwarf did something like that. If anyone's seen Red Dwarf, it's not one of the original Red Dwarfs. Then they had like a 10-year break and they did a revamp as they did. But they brought the original characters back. Anyway, that aside, they got a time machine. They went back. Jesus was sitting at the fucking local restaurant, half pissed, and getting picked on. Like, it was to make a reference point, it was a completely different person to what the actual books have been made about. Like, yeah.
I think he might have been a charismatic guy, but I think he might have been more like a little bit more politically savvy. I think he might have been not. I think he probably was inclined to violence, or at least that's what it was building up to, some kind of fight.
Yeah, he
in
was
order
building
to
an army. Well, not building an
Yeah.
army, but building a following that was,
They could justify some kind of upset. I mean, that's
something we were
speculation.
talking about before we went live, Jeff, was the first 300 years of Christianity was very, I wouldn't say full of turmoil, but there was a lot of different sects, there was a lot of different beliefs, there was a lot of different opinions about what and who Jesus actually was. People have the whole, what do you call that, the fucking Council of Nicaea, that didn't actually do anything from what I found out. It was one person that was at the Council of Nicaea that actually helped.
Well, that was sort of where
I don't know, whatever it was. I diverge, whatever the fuck it was.
Yeah.
It was the first 300 years approximately of Christianity was very, we believe this, we believe that. We had a lot of different sects from a lot of different stories. We have, we know this now because of what? The Gnostic Gospels? Nagahamtra, whatever it was, 1945, something like that. They were found. We had the Gospel of Thomas and things like that.
Oh yeah,
Nagamati
Library.
Yeah, the Nagamati Library. Yeah. We sort of that come out that shows that there was difference of opinion, that there was a lot of different. It's just because we're literally fucking 2,000 years approximately after this had happened. That's a long time for shit to, number one, exaggerate out of fucking control to the point where people need to step in and go, look, if it keeps going that way, as Jeff was saying with legend building, this guy's going to be splitting the moon with a fucking winged horse in 300 years. We need to chill this the fuck out and slam some shit down. So they come up with what is now known as canon. They have to put it down and put a stopping till it so we can slam it in. And we've had 1,700 years of it being slammed into us. And
when you think of it, that evolution continues, right? Because even with following the Protestant Reformation and prediction rightly from some of the Catholics, okay, if you guys get what you want, you guys are going to be at each other's throats. It's not going to stop you. You're just going to have dozens of translations of everything. They were kind of right. They were hyperventilating a little bit because they were losing control. But the idea of the narrative of Jesus coming out of the Gospels really doesn't get changed, but its emphasis does. Right. So, and you can see it in different denominations. There's the Jesus that's coming back with a rod of iron to sort some shit out, Texas Ranger style. And then there's the loving, forgiving, mother's fresh baked cookies and apple pie, kind of like everything's cool, man. I'm your favorite hippie. There's all these different versions.
Well, that's relying on your congregation, depending on what the preacher wants to tell the fucking congregation. At least 3 out of that, or at least 7 out of that congregation for every 10 is not going to read the Bible, is not going to back them up. They're going to just do what they're told, go on a Sunday, go whatever, and that preacher told me the interpretation, so I don't need to think.
A great example of what happens with religious thinking, and this is really kind of a stretch, but if anybody's seen the movie The Mist,
yeah,
it's a horror.
I've seen it.
Is that the one where they're trapped in the fucking shopping center?
Yeah, very, very kind of cheesy movie, but it's really well done. Frank Darabont did it, based on a short story from Stephen King, and it has a pretty shocking ending. But there's a part where the story pretty much turns around, there's this mist and these creatures are coming out and it's taking over this town, and these people are kind of hiding out in the supermarket, and you don't even get halfway through the movie and you realize that the real threat that these people face is each other. And there's a religious woman in the group, and the things that she says to people, and just tracking her kind of evolution of thought and how it influences people. It's kind of telling. It's an interesting movie just for that little bit. Some people think it's a little overwrought in that case, but it's I don't know. I think you get the right ingredients, the right type of people in a situation that traumatic, that fraught, that dangerous. You might get something like that. And to see those kinds of evolutions happen with any religion, I think, yeah. But anyway,
Yeah.
Historical
agree.
Jesus.
Can you see
Yeah,
the
I actually.
private chat, Skeptic?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Have a look in the private, Skeptic.
Okay.
Not your own privates, the private chat. Still there? Yeah.
Okay. Sure. Okay. Oh, I had something that I wanted to say, and then
Oh
I
no, well
forgot.
then yeah, no, keep going if you have. You get my point though.
Yeah, I get your point.
Yeah.
But yeah, I forgot what I was going to say. If someone else has something to add until I can
I'm
remember.
sorry.
Oh, I remember.
Yay.
I was basically just going to continue because I grew up in a religious household. So a lot of those ways of thinking were ingrained to me to the point where I didn't question them. And that's kind of what brought about the mythicism thing. It wasn't that, I doubt God, so now I know Jesus doesn't exist. It's just I didn't put any effort into seeing if God existed, if anything they told me in the Bible was real. So it occurred to me that I didn't have a good reason to believe in Jesus either. I just sort of took that for granted because my pastor said so.
Yeah.
And the presentation of the points that you guys have made here is very different from the points that I've encountered when speaking with Christians. Because I had a whole bunch of notes. I'm not going to go over all of them, but a lot of them have a lot of different reasonings that I think are flawed. Like, what's the one? The apostles died for their belief, and people don't die for something they know is a lie, so Jesus has to be real, kind of thing.
Oh yeah, look at Pizzagate. That guy, that guy that ran into fucking Pizzagate with a gun. I don't think that he believed that was fucking real. He was willing to. People believe and do some fucked up shit.
That's some egg on your face right there, and you walk in with your gun, and you're like, "Where are the kids held in the basement?" And they're like, "One, there's no basement. Two, we just came in here to get a pepperoni slice for our kid. So thanks for making things dark, creeper." I heard this was a pedophile den controlled by the Democrats. I came here to shoot them full of holes. Like,
Yeah.
we brought our 8-year-old here because he loves this pizza and he likes the owner. So thank you for filling his childhood with nightmares.
Yeah, traumatizing the fucking child when all he wanted was some fucking pizza.
But it was his intentions were good. He wanted to free the kids that were chained up.
Okay,
Now
we're rambling. Now we're literally doing
this
that
is
thing
crazy.
that I
This is
tried
crazy.
to fucking stop us from doing. Skeptic, will we
You
round up?
jerked the wheel. You jerked the wheel, and I joined in.
You
like,
see, it's
yes,
always
we're
Jeff's
going off
fault.
road.
Always Jeff's fault.
Yep. I'm ready to round up if everyone else is.
Well, I'll ask you a question now.
Okay.
After everything that we've went over tonight, after all the discussions that we've come over tonight, I know not 10-15 minutes ago you were describing that you come from a non-standard mythicist opinion. Where do you stand now after the information that's been put across about the opinions that's been put across? Where would you stand now? Would you believe? Could I ask you a question? Would you believe that Jesus was a real person, a man on the earth that was born of a woman?
I would say I'm still not convinced of that. I have to do my own research on the different type of points. Like I've been taking notes this whole time. So the different points that everyone has referenced, I have to do my own research and look up more about Josephus and Tacitus and different things of that nature. But I'm still at the point where I'm not convinced. I am less doubtful based on everything that's been said. It doesn't seem to be as unreasonable as other mythicists have made it out to be. But I am trying to be intellectually honest with myself and say that I need more time and more research before I, do a 180 on my belief on something.
I respect that answer more than if you said, yes, he's probably a man. It's the way we want everybody to go. Think for themselves, go and double check. But at least we've put points out. At least we've shared our opinion so you have an idea of non-mythicist opinion. But yeah, no, that's a good answer. Appreciate that.
Yep. And that actually leads into how I wanted to sort of wrap up. To whatever audience that we may have, one thing that I always try to emphasize, or at least I'm trying to get better at emphasizing, is, and I don't want to speak for everybody, but don't believe us. Don't watch the stream and get your opinions based on us. Do your own research. Look into these things for yourself. Like MathPig always says, think for yourself. I very much want everyone to look at the information and listen, but at the same time, I want everybody not to just go, well, I'm going to do the same thing I did when I was religious, just now that I'm not religious. I'm just going to believe people just on the opposite side. So that's my closing thing. I just wanted to say thank you everyone for sharing. Thank you for the
another
very
minute. No,
respectful.
keep talking for another wee minute there. I've got a thing
Okay.
to work. Keep talking.
Okay. Well, thank you everyone for the kind comments and stuff. This was really just brought about by my personal ignorance and inability to like consist and get every argument from every possible side on such a broad topic. But I really appreciate it, and I really appreciate you guys coming out to help a very, very much smaller channel. So yeah, thank you everyone for that, and I think the goal has been achieved, at least for me personally, because I wanted to learn more about the subject in a more neutral, non-judgmental environment where everyone was respectful. And I think that I've achieved that. And not once has anyone tried to convert me to anything. So I consider that to be a great stream.
Perfect. Well, I have a wee video that should round it up. As you say, man, I do. Sorry, before I do the introduction thing, is anyone else anything that they would like to say before I destroy everything and cut everyone off?
I just appreciate you having me on. It's a good discussion.
Good to talk to you again, man. Miss talking to you. Soothing voice. Good mic. It's not your voice, it's the good mic. Don't worry about it.
That's super good, Mike. Yeah, no, thanks, Skeleton, for having me, wanting me to come on. Appreciate being on your show. It's a good topic. It's a big one, too. So, yeah, this can get revisited lots of times. So,
yep. Thank you for showing up.
Yep. I am.
Thank you, Dr. Zoss. Thank you.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, Skeptic, if you're coming about, sub to Jeff, sub to Digital Hammurabi, sub to Jay as well. You'll probably see a lot of Josh on Jay's and think back and forth. So there's a wee group there with the three of them all. We all hang out and stuff. And definitely it would be worthwhile to get your input. As I said to Jefferson earlier, you're a very analytical thinker, very like Pine Creek, atheist, Josh, if you don't know. I think he was an atheist.
Yes, atheist.
So, a very analytical mind. So, I had fun. I very much enjoyed it. Thank you for having us on, Skeptic. And I think we're going to...
Thank you.
Yeah, perfect. We've got an after party sorted on Jefferson's channel. So, Jeff, put your channel link in the private chat and I'll share it in the live chat. And
okay. I tried putting it in there, but I don't have mods, so yeah, I didn't think about that.
I give myself moderator access because he gave me his password earlier. Okay, right. So on that, I've got this. This should hopefully work. And yeah, thank you very much, Skeptic.
No problem.
Oh, yeah. Well, it says thank you for watching that. It says think for yourself.
Well, that's the point. That's the important message.